Okay, this is the pattern I've come up with. It's basically going to be a fold-over holster with a reinforcing piece stitched to the outside. The strap that's going to hold it to the belt is going to come over the belt and over the trousers, come back up on the outside of the belt, and snap in place. Now, when I made this, I first took, since it's a fold-over holster, I first took a hunk of construction paper and folded it over. Look at it this way. I got some guidelines there. Then I took my glue gun, my fake gun, and I laid it on the paper, determining how I wanted it to sit. The gun it's going to be made for is a Smith & Wesson 640, which has a barrel that's 2 1/8 inches longer. So I knew that I wanted a barrel to be, this to be a 1/4 inch longer than this barrel, because this has a 1 7/8 inch barrel. So I measured, and it's just about a 1/2 inch. And that'll provide enough leather to protect the muzzle and to protect the person carrying it, because it's going to be inside their waistband. Appendix up front. Next thing I did is I made sure, let me turn it this way, that this piece met the center line plus a little bit further. You got to compensate for the thickness of the leather. The leather is 1/8 of an inch thick. 9 ounce anyway. So I went in just a little bit further, found where I wanted it, and came around to the other side with my pencil and drew it out. And that goes past the center line, because at that point the leather is going to be the two thicknesses put together, one on either side, and it's definitely thicker than a piece of paper. Then after I made this piece, I took it and I drew it onto another piece of construction paper and cut it out, and then drew it onto another piece of construction paper. The first pattern I drew, I cut this piece off. This is going to be my stitch line. And the second pattern I drew out my reinforcing strip, and then I cut that out. So now I have the main holster, the reinforcing belt strap loop retainer thingy, and the stitch line. I took and I cut these two pieces out, and here's where I'm at. Now, I was going to, the idea was to have y'all along and watch me do this a step at a time, but I had computer problems, so I couldn't do that. And this guy here, it's already paid for, so I couldn't just wait for my computer to come back. So, you know, I got some work done. This piece is the main holster body. The reinforcing piece is already glued to it. And it's time for the stitch holes. Time for me to punch the stitch holes in. So I'm going to go ahead and punch those stitch holes, and then die this, and then stitch this piece to this piece. Then I'll be able to wet it, fold it over, punch these stitch holes, dye it, etc., etc. One thing about the contact cement, when you glue a piece of leather to another piece of leather, that's not what holds it together. That holds it so you can work on it. Like if this was glued together and I tried to punch those stitch holes, that would be nearly impossible for me to get those holes to match up. I can also work on the edges while I'm doing that. I also burnish this piece. So I'll go ahead and set up for punching those stitch holes, and we'll get some work done. I did mean to tell you, but I forgot. A few of the things I use for drawing these patterns: straight edge, a pencil. I prefer using a mechanical pencil because when I'm in the middle of doing something, I don't have to stop and sharpen. I just go and I get a little bit more lead. A circle guide. I think it's called a circle gauge. That comes in very handy. And one of these things. Now, when I went to the store to get this mat, I saw this thing. What it is it's a bendable, I don't want to call it straight edge, but it's a bendable edge. And you could take like this curve here. If I wanted to make this curve instead of sketchy, I can just bend my gauge here to the shape that I want. See if I can get it to do that now. There you go. And just draw it inside of that, or flip it over, and it'll keep that curve. And it really helps when you're designing a holster, designing anything else on paper. Oops. You can just put this down on something after you determine the curve you want, and draw your line. It's very handy. Anyway, now let's get to work. Alright, we're going to get to punching holes in here in just a second. Get a little sit there. Push some of my junk back so it doesn't go jumping on me. One of them holsters up there might go jumping down. But, you know, that's the way it goes in the big city. Alright. First I'm going to space out my holes. Let's see how close I come to the corners. And that actually spaces out pretty darn perfect. So let me start with this one. I noticed in my other videos, after I went back and reviewed it, that I canted this thing way over. That wasn't intentional. In fact, I'm going to use the video right now, use the screen, to try and keep this straight. Because the idea is to go straight through. And that looks pretty straight there. Let's see if I can. Yeah, close enough. Okay, let me get the other side. Okay, the first one. Put one on the other side, and this one should be exactly in the middle between those 2 points. And we got some holes punched. Now I'm going to continue all the way around, get those holes punched in, and I'll come back to you. We'll go ahead and dye it, and then leave it set at that point. Come back and stitch it. See you then. Okay, I've got my holes punched, got all my stitch holes in, got my stitch groove in, and a word or two about punching these holes. When I go to punch them, I'll use my mallet, punch the holes in, boom, 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 boom. But what I do is before I punch all the holes, I go through and I make marks starting at the end I'm going to end up at. I'll mark the leather, just push it, push it, push it all the way along my stitch groove to where I'm punching. Then after I get back to my starting point, I can see how far off my holes are and how much I need to adjust it to get it to line up perfectly at these points. On this particular one, I had to stretch the holes just a little bit. Don't try to do it all at once. You got plenty of room, but you can stretch it just a tiny amount with each punch until you start lining up with your holes, and then you can just go. Now, time to get some dye work done. I got my dye bottle in my clamp. Got me your paper towel just in case. Actually, I got 2 paper towels just in case. And it's time for me to get some dye on this thing. I just take my dauber. I've used this dauber over and got some sawdust on it. Over and over. In fact, I've used the same bottle of dye over and over. I just have a, let me see if I can get that. There we go. It's just regular old spirit-based black dye. And I buy it by the quart, and then I take it from the quart to the little bottle. It's easier to work out of. When this starts running down, I fill it back up. To dye this, I take my dauber, I dip it in the dye, and I just smear it around. Some people have problems dyeing stuff black. I just found that if I use plenty of dye, it comes out fine for me. So let's get started. I got my dauber soaked. And then on the leather it goes. Yes, I'm doing this left-handed, and yes, I'm right-handed. In fact, I'm going to switch over. Even though my left hand works better than my right hand, I'm still right-handed. And I can still move a dauber around. Just as long as I keep my wrist braced, it'll be alright. What I like to do is keep putting the dye on until it doesn't soak in as readily. Like you see that? It's not soaking in as fast as the first coat did. Because that tells me that that's how much dye that leather is going to accept. See that? Bring it around the end, around here. Don't generally like to do straight lines, but I am doing it there, so let me swirl it around. When you're dyeing something, neatness counts, because if you try to make perfect lines, then you end up quite often with streaks where you made those perfect lines. Okay, let me just dye around here again. Why? A little bit more dye. Looking good. And I think I'm going to leave it there. And when we come back, I'm going to go ahead and start stitching it. Let this dry for a little while. And then we'll take care of that. Okay, see you then. Now, while this is drying, let's talk about leatherwork just a little bit. Sometimes people ask me, they say, hey Snubby, how'd you get into leatherwork in the first place? Well, I got into it because I need something to carry my gun in. This isn't, you know, the gun that I carry. This is a well, plastic holster maker's gun. It's called a blue gun. You can see it's been used quite a bit. And I had to figure out how I was going to carry my Snubby. I got a little J-frame, but mine has an enclosed hammer, so it doesn't have the hammer spur. Doesn't have an external hammer spur. So first, this is the first holster I made. Oh, I got some belly leather. It cost less, and I didn't really know what I was doing in the first place, so I didn't want to spend a lot of money on materials. I made the holes with a scratch awl, and I went to Walmart and got some craft needles, and I worked at a factory that made window blinds, and I got some of the reject blind cord, and that's how I made my first holster. And the leather I got, I think it was just $20 or so. But this is my pocket holster. You can see how the gun fits in there. And it's flexible, but it's stiff enough to hold the gun upright. So this is really a very comfortable pocket holster. Later ones I made out of the higher quality leather, like this, and I take and I mold them so the gun slips in and out easily, and then I'll curve this around to fit a person's leg. But it's pretty much the same pattern, just out of a better leather. Let's see now. Then I made a belt holster. This is an Avenger style. Now remember, my gun is hammerless, or has an enclosed hammer. But this one's a thumb brake. So to hold the gun in place, this is actually a nice little holster, but it's made out of the same leather. I just dyed it black. But it has a thumb brake on it. Works a lot better with the proper firearm. And the gun comes out. Carried this one for a while, but I found in practicing that I would fumble with this sometimes. Didn't like it. So I made another holster. It's an Avenger style, but it has no thumb brake or straps on top. But it does hold the firearm in pretty securely. This rode with me for a while until I had a customer request a pancake style holster. So I made one for him, and I liked it so much I made one for myself. This is now my current carry. This is how I carry my snubby on my belt. Let me see if I can get my belt down here. Now I made this belt also. It's 2 layers of 9-ounce leather, glued and stitched together. Heavy duty stainless steel roller buckle with heavy duty snaps. Later belts I made, I put in Chicago screws instead of snaps. I just felt it gave it more of a slimmer profile. You didn't have as much stuff mounted up in one spot. But I use this belt to test my belt loops to make sure that they'll fit my belt. My belt's a 1/4 inch thick, which is pretty much the standard for a heavy duty gun belt, and it fits into the slots, and it pretty much matches too, and I kind of like that. I keep it right next to my workbench. While I was at it, I made a holder for my flashlight. This rides on my belt also. So when I'm out the house, this goes on one side, this goes on the other, and off I go. My wife got me this. It's a little Brinkman. It's a nice little flashlight, and it's plenty bright enough for anything I need it for. Anyway, I'm going to let this dry a little bit more, and we'll get back to it and we'll start stitching.